not looking at every aspect of how force is used. We have had one work group already which turned in a report recently on less than lethal weapons and how they're used. We have another work group report which has just been going to go to the city council in a month or two on crowd control and how police crowd control tactics play out in situations, in demonstrations and that sort of thing. And so we're not looking at the broad scope of how force may be used. We're looking specifically at force situations which may or likely will lead to use of deadly force and how these policies will play out in the training and implementation of force policies. So,
I wanted to ask you, so you said that we adopted the policy for disengagement in 2011 in reference to dealing with people with mental health issues.
I think this is specifically in the DOJ agreement and specifically is aimed at people in mental health crisis.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And so, and there's no record of how that's worked, because I know that we've had a couple of shootings of people that have mental health crisis by the police since then.
I was actually looking for the policy in the directives on the Police Bureau website. I didn't realize that until 2 days ago. When I read the article about an Oregonian that mentioned it, and so I have been unable to locate it. That does not mean it's not there, but I'm sure it's in there somewhere. But I haven't dived into it enough to see how practical it is in other situations as well.
Well, I know I took a daily course training out there at Monument County Sheriff's, and we were supposed to be using tasers, and they gave me blocks, so sometimes they misplace things.
So we would welcome any questions, input, ideas. Please. Yes, ma'am.
When you talk about de-escalation, do you ever stop to think that if there's a potential for an intense situation, putting a bunch of people in full riot gear or armed cops by the, for lack of a better word, boatloads, is going to escalate tension? I have been at some demonstrations where I literally have had cops with beanbag guns staring at me with aggressive body language, like saying, come on. I mean, I've been in a stare-down match with one guy with a beanbag gun. When he realized he was not going to get a rise out of me, he moved on. But still, my blood pressure went up. I thought for sure I was going to get hurt, but I was fortunate enough to keep it for myself down.
I'm glad you brought that up, because if you look at our crowd control work group recommendations, that is one of them. And we will be bringing that to the city council in about a month. And I will say that, well, I was also on the crowd control work group as well, so I listened to a lot of the input on crowd control, and hopefully we'll see less of that and strict control over those things.
Yeah, because don't want it escalating. Don't put situations where just by human nature people are going to get nervous,
Exactly.
and it is going to escalate it.
Thank you.
A couple of weeks ago, when we were kettled over here by the police station, there was no clear relationship as to who gave the commands for them to, basically say that they were going to arrest all of us. And so I think that in some of the crowd control and some of the things outside of the gear, that there needs to be a clear level of protocol and use of, people that are freely assembling. When there's a protest, like when we went to Salem, the police came to us and said, hey, if you guys have any problems, let us know, and gave us a card. And then they knew we were coming to protest, and all they did was they made sure that they did their part in public safety by, acknowledging detours and doing things of that sort. And people that were with us were like, wow, this is like a parade, but it gave us the freedom to move around and do what we were supposed to do as, people that felt the need to protest. And so I think that needs to become part of their culture, because in the resistance that they say that we're resisting or they're ready to go home, they're making it more of a problem when they're stopping people from freely protesting. I think that they need maybe to learn a little bit more about constitutional law and not take it so personally that people are out there protesting, but to acknowledge that that is a freedom and that it needs to be not used against the people that are out there freely assembling, because it does kind of garner public opinion. We had somebody that was run down by a motorist, and because of the police reaction, that created an opportunity for public opinion to be dismayed against our civil liberties. And then again, in different instances, it changes the outcomes of people and what they're doing with their voices when the police force feels like they have to stop this or whatever.
Well, I would really encourage you to hopefully come to that city council meeting when the crowd control report is presented, because this question of kettling, or does it exist or doesn't it, and what constitutes kettling, and when are people free to leave, and are people being,
No, we still don't know if we were actually arrested or not.
Yeah.
Because they said we were under arrest, and they put all of us in a circle and held us, like we couldn't leave. And so to me, that is an arrest, even if we didn't get a citation, we were stuck for 30 minutes.
Thank you. Dan?
I found, I think, the reference that David was looking for, is in section, you know how I have filled out the numbering section?
Yeah.
It's the procedure section, 2.14, so there's multiple section 2s to the way they number. It says, during a confrontation with a person known or perceived to be in mental health crisis, members must recognize and legally balance the governmental interest in providing care to the person and calling specialized units from practice, which is not the same as a disengagement policy, but it could get there if it was appropriately explained there. So maybe you have to ask the Oregonian author if that's what we're talking about.
And one of the concerns we've had is that this document to us, I believe, at least I'm speaking for myself, is a directive composed by a committee, and it reflects a whole lot of different people's ideas on what should be said, and maybe it's not as clear as it should be. So that's one of our concerns, is that it's not going to be as effective as we would like it to be.
Just from the research I've done and reading how it's been working in other cities, I think one of the hopes that we're trying to get to, from my view, is that can a solution for a police officer be to walk away from a situation? Will that, if he does that, will that solve the issue? Like, is anything going to happen after he walks away? And using that more as a mindset from a police officer in situations where that seems like a viable option. Whereas once currently, if you've committed to a situation, you have to deal with it, and you have to use kind of whatever you need to do to make sure the issue gets resolved. Which not always, but a lot of times it results in arrest when it doesn't need to be. And I think if you look at like the Ferguson situation.
Excuse me, sir, isn't deciding to walk away still being committed to the situation?
It was disengaged, so.
Yeah. To like leave, and isn't that something that we don't have to go over? We can just think about that for a second. Isn't that still being committed to the situation? Doesn't mean that you're completely leaving the scene.
Right.
But you know that your presence there, if you were to remove yourself, you're committed to making the situation less aggressive, less volatile, whatever it is that you're trying to calm. Your presence leaving is being committed to the situation.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, right.
So to stay there and say like you have to stay there to be committed to the situation is not being completely, it's just confusing when I think what you're saying is that you have to stay there if you're committed to the situation. But to say I'm committed to the situation really means that if I leave, I'm still committed to bringing about peace and serving the community, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So maybe it's a dialogue that you should have with the department or the police officers or officials, is what those things actually mean, and not have just a defined committed means we have to continue to fight, or which is what it feels like as an observer is what's happening.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
agree. I'm not a police officer, I don't know their frame of mind, and when they approach a situation, how they go about processing.
But those phrases are very strong, and sometimes we need to step back and understand what they mean, you know? And what we could do to, and just think about what they mean. It doesn't mean that it's written in law, and this is what those things mean. Words are abstract.
And I'm going to give you my kind of point of view and what I observe when I see an officer interact in certain situations. Sometimes I feel like it seems like they feel committed, they have to resolve the issue, right?
Right, but that's what I'm saying, to resolve the issue is to walk away at times.
Right.
That's a
totally
choice,
agree.
and I get the impression that that is not a choice that a police officer is given, and then their life, as well as the public's safety, is put in jeopardy.
No, I agree, I definitely agree.
That's exactly what this policy is aimed at, providing the time and space so that decision, a life or death decision, doesn't have to be made like that. Somebody doesn't have to make a snap decision. It's either I'm going to die or they're going to die. We don't want to see that if it's at all possible. Yes, ma'am.
I think that part of the issue is that nobody really nobody brings the punishment to the police for the very first thing that should be looked at. If they were punished in some way, in some serious way, for infringing upon the civil rights of people to gather, then what this woman is saying would normally occur. They would have to walk away or step back, because they would know that coming in and creating engagement when no one has done anything wrong, clearly, by any video put out by anyone in any protest anywhere most of the time, that the cops couldn't engage in anything that would create destruction and harm to an individual or to the crowds for practicing and being human and being allowed in this United States to be on a street gathering. So I don't see anybody talking about when we start to punish police for infringing on our civil rights. I see punishment for engagement and punishment for all of this other stuff and killing and abuses, but not for civil rights. And that's the first piece. That was set up for all of us by the founding white fathers, you know, who maybe had they seen all this stuff coming or had the forethought to see that it was all built on slavery in the first place, that they should put something in place. Well, this is what we got. And if we actually use the little bit that they gave us, then this other shit would not go down and people would be left alone to protest what is wrong.
Without a permit.
Without a permit.
One of the things I think I would like everybody to understand is that there's when it comes to use of force, there's a standard which the United States Supreme Court has set, which is, it's a case, Graham versus Connor and Tennessee versus Garner, set a bar for when force can be used. And I know you're not talking about civil rights in relation to use of force, you're talking about freedom of speech.
Exactly.
But I just want everybody to understand that there's this line that the Supreme Court has said, the city of Portland has for several years been raising the bar above that, saying we don't have to go down to that Graham versus Connor bar. That's the bottom, so to speak. We should have a higher standard, and indeed our use of force policies in Portland say that Graham versus Connor, that the United States is the very bottom, and our police officers are expected to do more, not to use force in situations, even though under the U.S. Constitution they'd be allowed to do it. They cannot under our policies. One of our goals is to make sure that that's real clear where that line is, so it isn't a gray line going up and down. It's a pretty bright line that they can hopefully follow easily. Or if not easily,
Who is working on that in any of these committees to make sure that that kind of thing is followed and abided by, and making it clear to the police and teaching the police that there are rules upon which they cannot cross?
Well, there's one other thing you need to understand about the Citizen Review Committee, which is that although we are studying use of force policies and use of deadly force, we're not allowed to review a officer-involved shooting or in-custody death of the police force. Those are not reviewed by the Citizen Review Committee. Not all of us don't like that situation, but that's the way the ordinance reads now, so we are not able to review those cases.
So who reviews those cases?
The Police Review Board and ultimately the chief of police and
So
police
themselves.
commissioner.
If they're not pushing any type of punishment onto their fellow policemen, then that's like going in circles, like, who,
It's abstract.
it makes no sense for.
So let me,
No oversight.
I'll explain would somebody else like? You want to explain the police review board? You just said
Yeah.
involving officer
So if anything,
involvement.
you guys need to have that power to,
Well, there is a body that has that power, that's why I wanted, and it does involve citizens, so.
Derek, do you want to talk about the latest change that brought the CRC onto the police review boards? Or does one of the CRC members want to talk about that?
Yeah, I thought Jim just sat on a police review board, so.
I did. I want people out there to understand, because you want to go beyond one of the things that this group is working on, which is what we call strategic disengagement. You're looking at a much bigger, broader question, okay, which is very legitimate. Understand that in serious use of force cases, including the use of deadly force, normally that is not handled by the Citizens Review Committee. There is no public review of that. Let me explain how it happens, or the way it's handled now, and what the jurisdiction, under the way the current ordinance is interpreted, what part the CRC plays or doesn't play, which is related to your question. Right now, if there is a serious use of force issue, use of deadly force, the police department has set up what's called a police review board that, in the use of deadly force cases, consists of representatives of the department, citizen members, and because of the federal consent judgment, a member of the Citizens Review Committee. And I happen to sit on one regarding the use of deadly force. What that police review board does is make a recommendation to the chief regarding whether the use of force was within policy or without a policy. And then if it was without a policy, then recommendations can be made regarding discipline.
so you're saying you can only make recommendations for them to assume, to plant the idea to do the right thing, but you can't tell them, or you have no authority or power to
Yes, ma'am.
inflict those. Okay,
Very good point.
so that's basically,
When CRC hears an appeal, if the chief of police disagrees with us, if we decide against the chief of police, he can come and try to convince us that he's right. But if we still disagree, we can ultimately take the decision to the city council, and the city council will decide.
But with the police review board, right? Just a recommending body, and the chief of police does not have the recommendation.
That's right, and it's done confidentially. You can't reveal what's been presented, and it's a very good process. But there's no
If
public.
it's confidential, why is it a good process? I did not understand.
Except for that.
Except for that.
Exactly, let's go on.
You need the most
The
important part.
CRC, the Citizen Review Committee, if a citizen, you file a complaint against a police officer, and it's investigated by internal affairs or investigators from the independent police review. Ultimately, the chain of command within the police department will decide whether that officer's actions were consistent with policy or outside of policy. In those cases, only in those cases, not involving a use of force or deadly force, are appeals done in a public manner. Say, you didn't like the decision the police made.
Who writes up these policies?
We're
That's
gonna
all I
get there,
know.
because I've got some suggested changes, and I'm looking for community support. But I want you to understand the way things operate right now, so you can understand the need for change.
Jim, I just
So-
make that clear.
Yeah, please, for
Use
clarity.
of force cases do come before the citizen, right?
Yeah, let's call it
Deadly force cases
Let's call it deadly force. So the very types of cases that concern the community the most the Citizens Review Committee does not have any jurisdictional. Now, if we did, members of the public would have a right to come and see the information that's presented to the Citizens Review Committee, would have a right to see the Citizens Review Committee recommendation back to the chief. And if the chief disagreed, if the chief agreed, the matter can be resolved. If the chief disagreed, the chief meets with the Citizens Review Committee in public, and thereafter, if there is still no agreement on whether policy was violated, it ultimately, in a public meeting, is decided by the city council. But understand, this does not apply in use of deadly force cases, okay? And so the question becomes, if Portland says that there truly is independent police review, it might very well, a reasonable person can say that should apply to everything, especially those cases that are the most crucial,
Yes.
which impact the death of a person. Follow me? And for those cases, the process that was set up for CRC simply doesn't apply because of historical interpretation of the ordinance, and the city in a collective bargaining agreement agreed with the police union that CRC would not have jurisdiction.
Who interprets these?
Okay.
That collective
These-
agreement.
Yeah. Who
So-
interprets these policies and these rules and these laws?
We
Yeah.
looked into this, why CRC didn't have jurisdiction. If you read the ordinance that applies, that created the Citizen Review Committee, I
I
think you
didn't
would
answer
read
that
it.
question.
and you
I just want to know who interprets it.
The last, I was able to get a copy of a written opinion from the former director of the Independent Police Review Board, and she made that opinion, gave it to a citizen, and that was based upon input she had gotten from the city attorney's office.
Okay.
So did the city
Okay.
attorney or is it-
City attorney.
City attorney put the input in.
That was in the key notice.
Okay.
Okay.
So if the people, if the citizens of Portland feel that that ordinance and that relationship between the city and the police bureau is violating their civil liberties and their outcomes, would it be upon us to file a lawsuit against the city because of that relationship, because that contract that's in place is violating our civil liberties?
Or is there another mechanism?
One of the difficult things for people to understand is we don't, first of all, we don't decide criminal liability of a police officer. And secondly, police officers are employees, and throughout the United States, employment law and the relation between an employer and an employee is generally confidential. It's not public information. And this city operates the way most others do. They keep employer-employee information and discipline procedures confidential. The only exception being the CRC. When the CRC meets and listens to an appeal that involves alleged officer misconduct, then we recite the record. We tell what happened, and then the public gets to hear and decide for itself whether the officer acted correctly or incorrectly.
Okay, so I'm not sure I'm following. So you're saying that the employer and employee relationship is confidential. Does that mean that we won't find out who gives this type of power to the police, so we can change it? Or
And who gives them the powers?
Yeah, like who can we talk to to actually change something? Because it seems like we're just going around in a circle.
Exactly.
The directives are adopted by the chief of police, so this...
So, okay, so you keep saying the chief of police and the police independent review. So basically, they're just investigating themselves, and there's nothing we can do to change that? Because that's what I'm hearing.
Well, we have two investigative bodies in Portland that investigate the police. One is the Independent Police Review, which is not within the police department.
Okay.
And the other is Internal Affairs, which it is within the police department.
Okay, so one's insignificant and the other is a part of the police, so we get no.